not to the Biden, to the Putin and Tucker Carlson interview. Because one thing I will say, regardless of the content of the interview, I'll say that when you look at U.S. politicians and when they sit down for long form interviews, like hour plus, the way that he did, there's a lot of kind of misspeaking and there's a lot of, I didn't mean this, I didn't mean that. You did not see that very much in last night's interview. It was like every word was said with intention. It was placed with intention. There was really no backtracking on a lot of things. And I thought that was quite interesting. Obviously, the whole interview was very intentional for him trying to get a message out there. But want to get your guys' takes on that. What do you guys think? Whoever, I don't know if you guys watched the whole thing or at least seen clips, but generally, what are your takes?
Well, I think that it made you sympathetic to Vladimir Putin.
Gee, thanks.
I mean, I think that the first 30 minutes of him talking about the history of stuff was, it was boring. I don't know, whatever. I guess I just sort of skipped over that. Thank you, Tucker Carlson, for warning us about that before playing it, which maybe he did. I think maybe he was talking a little bit of shit about the interview about Putin to sort of throw off people saying that he was doing this because he's a Putin stooge or whatever. And this way he has plausible deniability. Look, I didn't like that either. Right. But it was interesting, right? I don't believe they're politicians. Politicians lie. First principle of politics. Everyone's lying. Right. And this is about war. So they're lying doubly hard. I think there's some truth to it, certainly grains of it, but I think it's kind of cool they did it, right?
Well, let me frame the question like this, and Adam, I'd be curious your take on this. Do you think more harm or good came out of it? And do you think this was an instance of maybe Tucker using his platform and then Vladimir Putin taking advantage of it in a negative light? Or do you think it was beneficial kind of having had this conversation and putting it out in the open?
I thought it was great. And I was arguing with people on Twitter before it when people are like, you shouldn't give an interview to someone like this. I mean, he's the leader of a country with the most nuclear weapons in the world. He's a major player politically, et cetera, et cetera. So, yes, I think the interview should have happened. I watched a good deal of it. And the first thing I was struck by, as most were, is that this guy can be referencing things from the 1200s and our president can't remember when his son died. So it's currently we're not in a good situation leadership wise in this country. And even if it was Trump, I'd feel the same way. And so I think it was fascinating to see a leader who you kind of only read about in history books. It reminded me of, James Polk or Sam Houston from the 1800s talking about their visions of the land and the West and what needs to happen. And, look, none of us are Ukrainian experts or Russian experts. So there's no way to evaluate whether what he's saying is true, but he believes what he's saying. So I thought the interview was fantastic. But I think he also is a horrible guy. I mean, he's a dictator. He's a killer. I think, I don't feel threatened by him. I don't think Americans should feel threatened by him, but I think we need to be careful dealing with him.
Yeah. I've watched the whole thing. Like, this dude is a former KGB agent and like one of the most powerful political leaders in the world. And he has an agenda. So the whole time I'm watching it, I'm trying to figure out exactly what it was. And I didn't find I liked it. It was hard to get through. I didn't find it super informative, I guess. Because if you're like reading the history of NATO and Russia outside of the mainstream media's account of it, like you knew about what happened in 2008, you knew about what happened in 2014 and kind of his red lines, as he said, that have been crossed. We know about those things. But what stood out to me most in his analysis was how he perceived or wanted to give the impression of how global power is changing and the U.S. is descending and this BRICS alliance is ascending. He kind of gave the impression to me, at least, that this was like common knowledge. And I don't know if you asked our leaders that they would agree with that. That was the first thing. And the second thing was his criticism of the U.S. using the U.S. dollar against him in this war and that it was a strategic blunder. He really, I thought, made a pretty solid point there that as a result of that, his partnership with China has only grown and made their economy stronger. And we're over here dealing with inflation and $33 trillion in debt.
Yeah, I mean, I watched most of it except for the last 7 minutes because I got on this. But what I thought was I got a sense that he kept trying to kind of drop these, I wouldn't call them Easter eggs, but these like little nuggets to maybe undermine U.S. credibility to its own citizens, like talking about the dollar, the part where it's like, well, why would they do that to their own taxpayers, or why are they spending money in Ukraine? Or there was another part where, with the Nordic Stream thing, which I mean, very well, CIA could have blown that thing up, probably did, who knows? But like, he kept dropping these nuggets, which in my opinion was his attempt to kind of signal to people in the U.S. that you should be questioning your government more, which we do, some of us do more than others. But that's what I was getting from it more than anything. I mean, I thought the whole Russian history at the beginning was pretty interesting. I wanted him to talk a bit more about Anastasia and whether or not she survived, because I mean, that's been a story for like past 100 years. Is Anastasia out there? Who knows? But he didn't talk about that. So, but I thought it was interesting. I don't know what Tucker's, when he went into it, what his intention to get out of it was, and I don't know if he got that, because I don't know what it was. I don't know what he set out to really get, whether it was just to give him a platform to say what he wanted, whether it was to push back. I didn't see a ton of pushing back. I would have, liked to see a little bit tussling more, the way that he used to do with U.S. politicians on his show. But again, you're in Russia, so you probably don't want to do that.
I think he did a decent job pushing back. He asked about, why not? Are you happy with the territory that you have now, right? And why don't you call Biden? Why haven't you talked to him? Call him up, have that conversation.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's pretty good pushback.
It's fair. But I mean, he used to be more aggressive with people in the US. Sorry, go ahead, Adam.
No, I think that I think it was good. And I also will just say, I think he knew his place in the sense that he doesn't know the history of Russia and Ukraine and that whole area. And what you have in the United States is you have all these people, and this is how this war has been sold to us, of like, poor little Ukraine is here, Russia is invading to get it back, and it's this very kind of elementary school story, when in reality it is thousands of years of history. And like the idea that like that doesn't matter is nonsense. And so that's what I thought was interesting about Putin, of when he's explaining it, and people online are just like shocked that he's going through all this history. And we're just so spoiled in America that all of our land is ours and no one doubts it anymore. But that's not always been the case. And so I thought the interview was great. And it reminded me a lot actually of when Trump went to go to North Korea and everyone freaked out about that. And I just don't understand these people that are like, we shouldn't go talk to people that are enemies. To me, if you don't talk to the enemy, they're always going to be the enemy. I'm not saying this is going to change the course of history, but I think it's important to understand where these people are coming from.
I agree on the history part. And it kind of caught me when Tucker kept like not interrupting, but he would say something and then Putin would be like, well, it doesn't seem like you care. And he's like, well, no, I just don't understand how this is relevant. But it was relevant because he's painting kind of a broader picture, a mosaic of how they got to this point and why he feels the way that he does. And so I thought it added a lot of context. I certainly got confused at points just because, you're going back to the 1200s. There was one point when Tucker was like, what year are we talking about? And he's like the 13th century. I'm like, geez, this is crazy. So it lost me a little bit. My eyes glazed over, but I kept trying to pay attention because I did think it was really interesting. And I learned a lot about kind of the overall conflict and Russia's perspective on it. So.
Can I play a quick clip of it?
Go for it.
Where it's maybe my favorite part of the interview. And I think
entire Parliament of Canada and applauded this man. How can this be imagined? The president of Ukraine himself, by the way, is a Jew by nationality.
Really, my question is, what do you do about it? I mean, Hitler's been dead for 80 years. Nazi Germany no longer exists. And so, true. And so I think what you're saying is you want to extinguish or at least control Ukrainian nationalism. But how? How do you do that?
Послушайте меня. Ваш вопрос очень тонкий.
Listen to me. Your question is very subtle, and I can tell you what I think. Do not take offense.
Of course.
Look how giddy he gets.
Он очень противный.
This question appears to be subtle. It
how he
is
is.
quite pesky.
Look at that.
Значит,
You say Hitler has been dead for so many years.
It was great. That was my favorite part of the whole.
That was your favorite part.
I mean, just how happy Tucker gets, just like smitten that he's talking to, Putin, and Putin's like schooling him.
Called him pesky.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I thought it was interesting. I would advise people who haven't watched it to go watch it. I think you learn something, you take something from it. You might hate it, but it's certainly worth a watch. I think that was probably the first time that and maybe I have, but I think it was the first time I've like ever heard Putin's voice. Like, I don't know that I've really like ever heard him. Now, obviously the guy who was translating was not Putin, but I don't think I've ever really heard him talk before. So that was interesting.
So that part, which I thought was interesting, Putin had just got done explaining, like, he's trying to eradicate neo-Nazism in Ukraine. And I think it's pretty established that there is neo-Nazism in Ukraine, and they have statues to these, former Nazis and everything like that. And that, I don't know that I buy it, that that's like a priority of Putin. I don't really know why that would be a priority of his. That seemed like a unbelievable answer.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah, I found that whole part weird. Yeah.
He was signaling. I think that's the thing. It's like this undercurrent that kind of like a reverse dog whistle, I guess. Like, I don't know to who, but there are people out there that he was signaling to. I think that, I don't know why else you would come forward with something like that, because I wouldn't say demonstrably false, but it's I don't believe it, and I feel like most people probably don't. So I don't know. I feel like signaling somebody.
How many people do you think watched that thing?
Well, I mean, the views are it's up to 122 million views on Twitter, but we all know that doesn't mean that people watched it all the way through. They could just maybe press play for a few seconds or saw it.
And it's on YouTube and his website. So, I mean, Lord knows.
Shall we move on?
Yes. So